And we are live again. Hello, Josh. How are you doing?
Jens, happy Friday. Great to be back for another live session. How's it going in
Ha-
Germany today?
Happy Friday. Crazy day and night because I launched this interesting podcasting product this morning at 10 or 10 past 10 even. I wanted to do it at 10, but we haven't been ready, like I told you already, but that's how it is. No,
That's how
all
it is, and
good.
I think maybe there's a reason you didn't release it at 10 exactly, and it's probably because of the foundations and the plumbing that you've put into the background to
Yeah.
make it all happen. So yeah, looking forward to seeing it live and in action, and yeah, I'm sure we might hear a bit about it in this conversation.
Yeah. And it's good to be back an hour later than usually. So it's 12 here in Central European time, lunchtime. So it's a lunch Friday live, not 11
Lunch
because I
Friday
wasn't
live.
ready. I was texting for everyone
Yeah.
who's interested in stuff behind the scenes. I wasn't ready because I haven't showered because of the launch last night or this morning. But that's how it is.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Life is
making things work, and it's quite fascinating. I've been thinking a lot about this environment that we're navigating and how we're getting to know people around the world, how we're interacting, when are we interacting, and all of those things. And I think there are a few certain things that we should maybe all pay a bit more attention to. And I'm sure we may touch on some of them inside of the conversation theme that we've got lined up today. But maybe just quickly, let's say hello to everyone that may be watching and that will listen to this live and or in the podcast in a recorded format. Is the Reverse Mental Lab is essentially a space where the leaders of today can learn from the leaders of tomorrow. And Jens and I have been working together for going on a year now, and we've really formulated this space of what we're quite passionate about is something called cross-generational learning. And inside of that, what we really hope to ignite and inspire is this interaction between different generations. How can people go about that? And what does that mean in terms of what we can learn from one another? And so often, especially I think inside of a physical space, we had what I like to refer to as serendipitous interactions, where you maybe bumped into someone in the corridor while you're at work, or you bumped into someone at a cocktail function. But in this highly digital native and almost digital first environment, we don't have those interactions. So how do we go about creating those? We've got great content formats like podcasts and videos and things like that. But I think conversations like this will hopefully inspire people to think through things differently. And maybe if we lucky, also learn a thing or two from us, Jens.
yeah. No, I agree. It's so much things are changing. I mean, even if we just and by the way, this is episode number 40 on our own podcast. Isn't that amazing? Just to let that sink in. And it's not including the prototype podcast episodes we did on my show. So it's number 40, which is amazing. Now, yeah, agree. I think a lot of things are changing and we still need to get used to this world. I mean, I'm still need to get used to that world where, I mean, it's already 1.5 years almost ago that we moved back to Germany and I'm not at all working inside the corporate world. And I see this, maybe that fits as well to our conversation today. I don't really want. I don't really want to work in and with very large corporations because I don't know. There's still pain somewhere in myself, which is, and we have talked about that this week as well with guests on our show on the podcast recording, which was Anissa, which we interviewed on Wednesday. The episode is not out yet, and she's a former HR executive of a Fortune 500 company, and it's quite interesting that she was sharing a little bit as well of what's happening in this world and what is the future of work, which is like a buzzword that's out there in a lot of corporations right now. And what is the future setup in organizations and how do people work in different ways in the future? So she gave us a little bit of her perspective on this. So everyone who is interested in that, go to that episode. That's episode number 39, and my video is gone. I hope you can see me, hear me still. It's live.
Yeah, we got you. We heard all of that, so no worries. It's this digital world, and I think, yeah, Jens, that's a great tee up for what we've got, what lined up for today is the changes that are happening inside of the space, what the future may look like, how do we go about navigating the future, and also what part of the future will people involve, and how people go about creating or curating even what the future of work may look like, and the future interactions and things like that. And so, what we'd lined up to chat about today was really around why do you think the concept of age constrains interactions across generations. And maybe just a bit of background in terms of how I came up with this topic. And it really came around in terms of, so often we think about age when we think about people and we think about organizations, is when you're a graduate, you're relatively young and you come into an organization and you're interacting or have the opportunity to interact with managers who are maybe 5 to 10 years older than yourself. And there's almost like this barrier or this boundary that can exist in highly traditional or highly hierarchical organizations. But what happens when that hierarchy breaks down and it's so-called a flat organizational structure? Does that mean that you have people of different ages interacting with one another, or is there still this constraint because of this age? And an example may be, I had the opportunity to come into the work world relatively young. I only studied for 3 years at university. And I came in, I had these opportunities to interact with people who were 20 to 25 and 5 years older than me. So everyone was older than me. I was the youngest person inside of the organization. And it got me thinking about, that's what an everyday situation, where I've come into a startup type ecosystem, a startup type of environment, and age didn't necessarily constrain the way and the opportunities that I had. And I had the opportunity to show up and do the work, which meant that I gained respect. I gained sort of a reputation for someone that they could turn to if something needed to get done. But a lot of hierarchical and traditional organizations don't enable that opportunity. So that's just a bit of history around how I came up with the topic. But Jens, I'll throw it back to you and maybe ask you to share a few thoughts on what you think and why age may constrain the cross-generational interactions.
Yeah, I think a lot of parts of that is the history and the culture we grew up in. And if we go far back, if you look into like very ancient groups of people, there you always respected the elders. If you take that as an example, so the elders are the wise people who have learned a lot and have a lot of experience, and I think that's something which kept us traditionally doing that, and I think it's still the case and it's still valid, and not something wrong. It's more about, that's maybe when you go into the work world right now, specifically with all the changes happened the last 5 years, let's say, that's not relevant anymore. It doesn't mean that an older person, a more experienced person, is more knowledgeable about different topics in an organization. And we have talked about Web 3.0 in the last episodes and all these topics, where maybe if you have a 25-year-old person, or if we take you as an example with 29, is it 29 still? Yes. Or 30 already? 28, yeah,
28.
old.
I'll take the extra year. It's
See,
it
you're
makes me
more
seem a bit
senior.
wiser.
So if you take a young person, like you yourself, you have like a ton of knowledge of Web 3.0. And if you take myself now getting towards 41, which is plus 10 years difference, I have zero. I mean, not completely zero understanding of the Web 3.0, but like almost zero. And if we would be in a very large context of an organization, we might even not talk to each other because of different of positions and different of history and so on. And that's not really facilitated in an organization. Another example is, I think, the whole society angle of that will change over time. And I have had, we need to get him on the podcast, by the way, Paul. Um, he 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 started to study again when he was 62 or something. He went into university when he was 62. I mean, that's mind blowing, because he's saying, yeah, I want to learn things in a different way, and I start over again and figuring it out. And I loved, and he's a successful business person. He's successful in very large organizations. He's just doing that because he enjoys to learn and he enjoys to develop as a person. So it's quite interesting to see these opportunities and these changes in society. And I think that's something we need to work with, and we need to get used to in different ways that helps us to understand of how do we navigate in a world where it's not about age, where it's more about who can bring value from what angle ever you come. Long answer.
Yeah, a great answer actually. Although it is sort of multi-layered in what you put down. And I think the first thread that I'd like to pull on is just around this concept of history and existing constructions inside of an
Mm.
organization and inside of society, and why that may influence the lack of interaction between generations. And if you think about simplistically what that may mean, is that there are essentially Chinese walls that are built up inside organizations, meaning
Mm.
that graduates have to go through a certain form of training or get to a certain level before they are exposed to a direct interaction with the CEO, for example, or a senior manager.
Yeah.
And immediately I will come in and maybe be a bit provocative and saying, why do you do that? Why should a graduate not be exposed to a CEO? And some, you don't need to be exposed to a CEO on everything, because some executives do have a certain way of thinking and they will maybe push a graduate too far in terms of that. But I think that exposure that a graduate can have in terms of being exposed to people who've been in an organization for a longer period of time is needed and should be encouraged inside big organizations, because there's a lot to learn inside of that. However, I do think that it should be maybe moderated and managed a bit in terms of that overall interaction. So,
Yeah, we got
Jens, I'm
a
going to let
good
you
comment
from
from Gary.
quickly.
Hey Gary, by the way. He's writing, I entered the workplace where we looked up to the guys in the good suits. Now the guys in the good suits work for the guys in the jeans and t-shirts. Love that. And
Yeah,
it's true. I mean, if you look into specifically the tech organizations, what's going on, and that's tech is just one example. If you look Tesla, Elon Musk, he's not wearing a suit. And he's one of the most successful business and entrepreneurs in the world. This, I mean, of course, he wears suits when it's needed, but I guess not for business stuff, for himself. And same
yeah.
with the others. Mark Zuckerberg, he's not wearing suits. Who else do we have?
Yeah, there's a long list, and if you
Yeah.
think about, there's currently a crypto conference in Lisbon in Portugal on at the moment,
Mm.
and if you just go and look at the way that people are dressing, and I think again this goes back to a construct in terms of the association that we have with how people dress, the professionalism that they show, but these are highly intelligent individuals who will show up in a t-shirt and jeans, for example,
Yeah.
and if you throw that into traditional corporate, a lot of them won't even get through the door. And that's almost a bit discriminatory in terms of the way people think. And my concern is that is a lack of generational interaction, because they feel like the older generation are being disrespected.
Yeah.
If a young person comes to a meeting in a t-shirt as opposed to not in a $10,000 or a $5,000 suit, for example, what does that mean in terms of how and where we go about putting our energy and things like that? And the other element is, why this may be happening is because people don't really like to change, and change is hard. And we were talking about it, funnily enough, before we started recording, about the importance of these systems and processes that are put in place in the background when you go through a change management project. And if you think about a simple example that Jens and I have been involved in the last year, is helping with bringing young thinkers into a core team to help manage a change management project. And that has already taken a lot of effort and a lot of work on Jens's behalf to interact with their so-called experienced thinkers inside the organization, to get them to see the value of bringing in younger minds to either challenge their viewpoints, but also to learn from the experienced thinkers inside the organization.
Yeah. And if we take that example without going into too much details, I think it's really a lot of people, and we have talked about that ton of times, are about, hey, how can we have the quick fix? How can we do something and we have the direct result right now? And if you look into these interactions between different generations, then let's say if you organize a meeting or a training or whatever you do in an organization, then you say, now we bring the different people together with different backgrounds, and that's even not age related. And you just do that once and you don't follow up, you don't build a culture around this, then it's like waste of time. And everyone in or at least we have worked with a couple of organizations and see that as well from our pasts. A lot of organizations are not taking that honestly enough because the pain is not high enough just yet. Everyone understands logically we need to change the way how we think. We need to change how we work with each other. We need to change how we integrate generations working with each other, because people are getting older, people are retiring later, and most probably maybe at some point in time never retiring, because it's not the model anymore. That means now we work, what was it, 8 generations in one workforce, or five?
Five
Yeah,
generations, yeah.
8 is maybe a bit too much, but but 5 generations in one workplace. If we just look at that, and people are getting older, younger people coming into the workplace, if you don't build a culture around that, if you don't build opportunities where they can work together, the business will not be future fit. And
Hmm.
everyone understands that logically as well, to get the new talent. If you take just the example of the Web 3.0 conference in Lisbon, I mean, who of them would ever think about working with a large corporation? I guess 80% of them will say straight away, never ever, if I need to dress up. If we just take this dress example from the beginning again, if I need
I'd
to
probably
wear a
put it.
suit,
I'd probably put it at 100, Jens,
yeah,
knowing the crowd that's there, and just double clicking on what you mentioned about the pain point is also potentially a thread that we should unpack. Is why this interaction between generations is not happening. It's because the pain point is not high enough, and it's easier to continue doing things the way that it's been done rather than changing to a new way of working or a new way of thinking. And a simple example, maybe, and it might sound inside of this conversation to those listening that we're really focusing on, hey, the experienced thinkers or the executives need to do a lot of the work. And yes, that is true, but it's also the young thinkers that also need to show patience and listen.
yeah,
And I've mentioned this in a previous podcast recording, is where I discussed and I said that sometimes young thinkers can become incredibly reactive, and they don't appreciate listening and actually absorbing different points of view. And I'll use an example here. Is when I was starting out in my career, I also had a hard and fast way that I felt that things should be done. And coming in, you're sort of young, you're energetic, you're wanting to prove yourself, you're wanting to grow your reputation, and you're doing a lot of work, but are you listening to the feedback that you're receiving? And are you listening to the points of view that an experienced thinker is raising inside of that? Because if you go into this hard and fast mindset, you often miss the feedback points, which means that you're not listening correctly, which means that you're also not listening to the feedback from the older generations who have walked the road ahead of you, and maybe have some points that you should be listening to. You don't have to listen to everything, but I encourage you to think about how do you go about listening, because it's also a form of respect, like Jens mentioned, in terms of the elders that we've come from history and things like that. But by purely listening, you're not only respecting the people, but also you're learning through that action that you're partaking in.
yeah. And I think that's going back to using the same language and trying to understand each other in different ways. And I think a lot of organizations, and Gary just posted a great example for that, are not ready, or they think they are, but they are not. And I think if we just put that comment up, Gary is writing, I've presented our digital ecosystem to various brands of mall groups. They loved what I had to say and believed that it was the future. However, as they did not even understand the terminology that I used, they could not make a decision. So the decision was no decision. And that's exactly
Okay.
to that point. I mean, Gary and his team, they're on the forefront of the technology in an industry. If we take retail and real estate and shopping centers, they're at the forefront of what's happening with the technology and how you can utilize that as an ecosystem. And a lot of companies are eager in change, like from a mindset of eager and exploring things, but when it comes to getting it done and deciding, they're still going to the old model of saying, yeah, but we have done it the last 50 years like this, and that was successful. Why should we change? Why should we invest
Mm.
right now? And that's the same thing with understanding each other from different languages. If you just come from, let's say, different planets almost.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny because my mind goes towards understanding human psychology and what
Yeah.
may, like you mentioned, the pain's not great enough. So is that why there aren't generational interactions happening because of age? And it's multi-layered, like we've discussed already. But another thing that I think of is around the values, language, and access in terms of what that means, like Gary very well put, in terms of understanding the terminology.
Yeah.
And I think I was running a session yesterday where I had to be conscious of the way that I was explaining myself and the questions, or how I was asking those questions rather. And I always check myself when I'm in those public environments saying, does this make sense? If it doesn't make sense, please ask me to explain it in a different way. And the first example that I had of this was when I sort of went down a deep dive in data analytics a couple of years ago. And I was looking at the data in a specific way and presenting it and visualizing it in a way that I thought makes sense. But the executives that I was presenting it to, it didn't make sense. So I think that really talks to the language and the terminology that you need to be aware of to maybe bridge that gap to allow for more interactions between different generations and between different age groups as well.
Yeah. I would like to hit harder on the age differences because that's the topic of today. So for me, there's no difference from a perspective of if you're, let's say, you are born in a different time than another person. That might mean if you're 10 years older, 20 years older, you might have more experience, and that's a good thing. But if you don't use that knowledge and if you don't use that experience to enhance the experience of young people who are now, if you take the work environment, who are now starting inside the work environment, then you're kind of using it as a power instrument. You're using it as a power instrument, which means I know more than you know. That's why I am higher than you are. And I think if we now bridge that towards what's happening in the future, where I truly believe that we have a completely different work model where companies will not be very, very large from a workforce perspective. There will be people who are working full time for the organization. A lot of people will be working part time, might even not be fully employed by one organization. They work for other organizations. So, more if we compare it with the freelancer model today. So, if that's the case, what does it then make sense for you as let's say an older person to keep that knowledge to yourself? The other way around, in the same way, you as a young person, if we take yourself and you make that very, very well, it's like you are sharing what you're learning straight away. You are sharing what you're learning on Web 3.0, which is a very, very new topic, very interesting topic, straight away in your newsletter. You're sharing as much as you understand, as much as you can, because you're still on your learning journey. And I think that's a part which we all can work with each other and learn from each other, where we just say, how can we help each other learning? And it's not about age, it's more about, hey, let's meet together and figure out what you know more that I need, and the other way around in the same way.
Yeah, that's an awesome place that you took the conversation, Jens. And going back to how you provoked, why is it that age sort of creates this barrier? And immediately what springs to mind is that potentially this notion of experience, IP, is very closely linked with age. So simple example, I've been in said industry for 10 years. Therefore, I'm more experienced than myself coming into that industry. So that's an IP. That's something I want to protect. That means that I fight hard to protect my place in that industry, and I don't want to give that IP away. So I don't want to help young thinkers coming into that industry. Take myself, for example, is I've got a very open notion of sharing and an open sort of knowledge base that I'm happily sharing. I'm a strong believer that you can share and you can share ideas. Coming up with ideas is the easy part of it, but actually doing the work is the hard part of it. And if you think about that from what that means in terms of the way that we interact and why it is that maybe there is this limit of generational exchange inside organizations, but also inside society, it's because of that notion. It's because RP is framed as this experience, which means time spent doing something rather than how you have actioned about it. So your reputation more comes around your experience, the length of time that you've spent in, rather than how many people have you helped or what have you connected inside of that space. And that's maybe where there is a huge shift that's going to happen in terms of this open source collaborative way of working that is rolling out still in its infancy in terms of Web3 and new ways of organizing and things like that. But the learnings from that, if bigger organizations and in society in general aren't paying attention to what's happening in that space, I'm a strong believer and I'll firmly advocate that I think that they're going to get left behind,
Yeah.
because you're not going to have, like you mentioned already, your top talent coming together. If your top talent aren't having that opportunity to interact with one another, what does that mean for the future of work, and what does that mean for the people that you're going to bring into your organization?
Yeah. Agree. And I think it's also the part where we might, with this topic right now, we might be too early, which sounds weird because of the pressure and the thinking and the tools, and it's not there yet. Some industries are faster than others. But if we just take an example in the Entrepreneur's Fuck Up Night 2 weeks ago or a week ago, feels like months, but I think it was a week ago. Rule was telling a story as well around that topics, and he was just 10 years too early with one of his ideas. 10 years is a long time. And I think I would love to look back at this. So today is the 22nd of October, 2021. In 10 years, we will look back and watch this video. And most probably, the situation of organizations on how they interact with between the different generation is completely different. It's 2031, 22nd of October 2031. The interaction, if you just look back, if you take myself 10 years back, that was 2011. Holy cow. Where was I? I think I was regional manager or project manager inside the German IKEA organization. If you just take that as an example, the work environment was completely different compared to today already. And what I have experienced at that time, there was no discussion on self-driven teams and how you can engage in different ways, and that's just 10 years ago. In between, there have been written books about that. Organization has completely changed on how do they manage without hierarchy, and that's still early on that topic. So we are not there yet with that topic even, but it's proven that it works in a lot of organizations and a lot of cultures as well. If we now fast forward another 10 years, it's going to be different because the pandemic has accelerated so many things over the last 1.5, almost 2 years now. That's huge. And I think a lot of things will not go back. Like we discussed with Anissa on Wednesday in the podcast, episode number 39, for everyone who is interested in that, coming up in a couple of days. If we just take that example of what she mentioned as well, that the work environment will be completely different, I think it's going to be a huge difference.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to this concept that, or sort of the frame that we set up for the conversation to around why do these constraints exist around age? And we've chatted about one of them already, and while you were talking, Jens, about the shifts that are happening in 10 years time and looking back in history and things like that, my mind goes towards relationships and how relationships develop over time. But I also think around what I'm experiencing currently is this emergence environment where relationships are open, far more open than I've experienced in my world of work so far, where people are willing to help one another. And again, it goes back to this concept of, if you help someone, you're worried that they're going to eat your lunch. So you may have a senior manager that sees a progressing individual inside an organization and they're, shucks, this person has serious potential, and I'm worried that if I give them a leg up, they're actually going to take my position. And I think that that's something that it's a touchy subject, and I don't think we have time today to really unpack that and deconstruct that. But again, it goes back to this human motivation, human psychology, and also what does it mean to actually belong in a workplace? And I think that that's something that is a rabbit hole that we'll have to go down with some HR professionals and some young people and ask them, different sides of the same coin. But I think that that's where my mind went around how relationships, potentially you guarding those relationships and you guarding your experience, so you don't want to actually open up. And it takes a specific and a special type of leader, both sides, a young thinker and an experienced thinker, to actually step out and to do things differently.
Yeah. It's big. Yeah, if we go in, then we need another half an hour. Let's
Yeah,
bring it to an end. So for everyone who is watching live or who is listening and watching later on, if you're interested to jump on one of this bigger conversation, which we want to start soon, where we bring specifically, I mean, you have now touched the HR topic, but I think that's a good starting point. If we bring people together, if you are interested in being part of a conversation around these topics, which is generational exchange, what is the future of work, how do we future fit organization with the perspective of learning from each other, if you're interested in this, contact us. We're organizing something where we bring people together and try to have a conversation. We might do this live. We might do that in a recording. We might do that in a just a Zoom call where we bring people together. We haven't planned it in all details yet, but if you are interested, connect to us. We are eager to find a couple of people who are either professionals or who have just a passion around that topic. That's it.
awesome.
Anything
So
to
Jens,
add?
to wrap up, I'm going to put us both a bit on the spot here, and I'm going to say let's share
Uh-oh.
one tip where we provide some of our thinking, maybe from experience, but also from the way of our minds work in terms of how we could go around breaking this age barrier down.
Yeah. Okay, I will start without preparation as usual. Now, what it's hard work. I mean, if I just tie that back to the beginning of today's, where I said I was literally working all night and early morning, and we moved our live show a little later today to be able to make it. It's nothing comes easy. Good things don't come easy, and I've experienced that over and over and over again. I mean, the product launch which we did today, which is not yet a failure, I have no idea, but might be, but it's happening because of a lot of work. If we go back into my sports history, finishing an Ironman is not something that happens overnight. You need to work your ass off to do that, and I think it's with these topics it's the same way. If you want to engage with a different generation, you need to move and you need to get started. You need to work hard on it and don't give up after someone is saying, yeah, no, I don't want to talk to you.
Mm. Yeah, that's a powerful call to action. So I'll tap onto that, and I'll say, as a young thinker, and potentially also this speaks to experienced thinkers, but specifically for young thinkers, is when you think about engaging with an experienced thinker, think outside of the situation that you're in. So try to get to know them on a personal level, understand their interests, understand their whole being rather than just their work orientation role, because you'll be amazed what that can do from a conversation perspective. So that when you go about engaging with them, you can either find common interests or you know a bit more about what they're interested in outside of the work environment. So yeah, Jens, I've really enjoyed today's conversation, and we've put ourselves on the spot, but we've also been a bit provocative in terms of some of the things that we've raised. So we'll see who
Yeah,
picks up on that.
that's why I have my provocateur flat camp today without knowing that
Yeah,
before. Awesome. Thanks,
cool.
Josh. Thank everyone for listening, watching live and or the recording later on. See you. Oh, next Friday we can't make it because I will be in the car. But let's figure that out. Maybe we do it Thursday. Worst case, the week after, where I'm in an airplane at that time. But yeah, we will figure it out. You will see it on online if you're interested. Thank you very much, and see you again.